On my wedding night, I heard my husband whisper another woman's name, and that woman was my best friend. I wish I could tell you it was a misunderstanding, a dream, a cruel trick of the night, but no, it was real. And once you've heard the sound of your world breaking, you never forget it. People saw the fairy tale that day. The perfect couple, Ethan and Mary, smiling under the sun, exchanging vows beneath an arch of pale pink roses. The estate was glowing, the music gentle, the laughter sincere. My friends called it a storybook wedding. They said I looked radiant, that I was the picture of happiness. But they didn't see the small things, the way Ethan's hand trembled when he slid the ring onto my finger, or how his eyes kept darting toward the maid of honor. Chloe, my best friend since college. I thought it was nerves. I told myself love makes people strange, nervous, emotional. But deep down, there was a flicker, something in my chest that felt off, like a cold wind brushing against the back of my neck. I pushed it away because that's what you do when you love someone. You make excuses for the things that don't make sense. The day had been perfect, or at least that's what I forced myself to believe. My mother cried during the vows. My father, who barely ever smiled, held my hand during our dance. I remember twirling in my dress, soft silk brushing my skin, the scent of roses heavy in the air, candlelight catching on the crystals scattered across the tables. I felt beautiful. I felt chosen. I felt like everything I'd ever dreamed of had finally come true. And Chloe, she was right there beside me, laughing, helping with my veil, telling everyone how she'd never seen me so happy. She'd been my anchor, my sister in every way that mattered. If someone had told me that she would be the one to destroy everything, I would have laughed in their face. After the reception ended, guests drifted off one by one. The candles burned lower and the laughter turned to soft echoes through the halls. The estate grew quiet, filled only with the distant chirping of crickets and the hum of the air. I remember standing by the window in our bridal suite, watching the moonlight spill across the lawn, thinking, this is it. My life begins now. But it didn't. It ended. Ethan wasn't there. At first, I thought he was just downstairs, maybe thanking the staff or talking to his mother. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, a knot began to form in my chest. I called his name softly, the way I always did when I wanted to find him. No answer. I walked through the halls barefoot, holding the edges of my dress so I wouldn't trip. Every step echoed too loudly. Every shadow looked like guilt. And then I heard it. A whisper. Low, intimate, wrong. My heart froze. I followed the sound, slow, careful, my hand on the wall to keep steady. The voices grew clearer as I approached Ethan's mother room. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. Don't worry, Ethan's voice murmured. She'll be asleep by now. And then Chloe's voice, soft, familiar, poisonous. I still can't believe you actually married her. That's when the air left my lungs. My knees went weak. You know that feeling when your mind can't keep up with your heart? When you're hearing something that doesn't fit the world you know? I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't need to see them. I already knew. But fate is cruel. Because I saw anyway. The door wasn't fully shut, and through the gap, I saw them. His hand on her skin. Her lips on his neck. My husband, my best friend, my wedding night. In that moment, I felt myself splitting in two. One part of me wanted to scream, to rip that door open and make the world see what they'd done. But another part, the quieter, colder part, just watched. Silent. Detached. Because what was the point of screaming when the truth was already louder than your voice could ever be? I walked away. My wedding dress brushed against the wall, the hem catching on the corner of the carpet. I don't even remember breathing. When I reached the grand hall, I caught sight of myself in a mirror. The veil, the tears, the trembling hands. I looked like a ghost, haunting her own happiness. I went outside into the night. The garden lights had gone out, leaving only the moon. The fountain trickled softly, mocking me with its peace. I sat on the cold stone edge, staring at my reflection in the water. My mascara had run and my lips were trembling, but I didn't cry. Not yet. People think heartbreak is loud. Sobs, screams, thrown plates. But it's not. It's quiet. It's the silence after a promise dies. It's sitting in a wedding dress you'll never wear again, realizing the two people you loved most in the world have written your destruction together. I stayed there until dawn. The sun rose over the hills, painting the estate in gold. The world had the audacity to look beautiful while mine was ending. When I finally stood up, I took off my veil and dropped it into the fountain. It floated for a second before sinking, disappearing beneath the ripples. That was the moment I decided. If my old life had died, I would bury it myself. When I walked back inside, the house smelled like coffee and lies. Ethan was in the kitchen, still wearing his wedding ring. Chloe sat beside him, eyes red but dry. They didn't expect me to walk in. The silence was suffocating. "How long?" I asked. Neither of them spoke. Ethan looked down. Chloe started to cry. That was all I needed to know. "It just happened," Ethan finally whispered. "It meant nothing." I almost laughed. "Nothing? You destroy someone's world and call it nothing?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and said quietly, "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Ethan. What you did was a choice." And then I left. No yelling, no begging, just the sound of my heels on marble as I walked out of the house I'd rented for our future. Outside, the gravel dug into my bare feet, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back, because when you walk away from your own ashes, you don't need shoes. You just need strength. That morning, as I stood on the side of the road in a torn wedding dress with the wind in my hair, I made a promise to myself. I would rise. I didn't know how or when, but I would. You ever feel that moment when pain becomes power? When the tears dry and what's left is just fire? That was me, standing barefoot on the side of a road, holding the pieces of my life. I realized something Ethan and Chloe never would. You can't destroy a woman who has nothing left to lose. And that's how my story truly began. When I walked away from that estate, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a home to run to or even a bag to carry. I had a dress, a ring, and the crushing weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. But I also had something else. Silence. Not the kind that breaks you, the kind that sharpens you. The kind that whispers, watch, learn, wait. I spent that first night in a small roadside motel, still in my wedding dress. The receptionist didn't ask questions. She just looked at me with a kind of pity that made me want to disappear. I sat on the edge of that cheap bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning in slow circles. I replayed everything. Every smile, every promise, every "I love you" Ethan had ever said. Each one now felt like a lie carved into my skin. I took off the ring that night, not gently, not with sadness. I ripped it off like it was poison.
I left it on the nightstand, next to the lamp, and thought, that's yours, Ethan. All the promises you broke, all the years you wasted. For the first few days, I didn't tell anyone what happened. My phone buzzed endlessly. Family, friends, guests asking where we'd gone for the honeymoon, how the wedding night was. I couldn't answer. What would I even say? My husband and best friend are probably still sleeping off the guilt. But silence doesn't last forever. Eventually, truth needs air. It was my mother who broke through first. She came to see me after I stopped answering calls. I'll never forget her face when she saw me. Hair tangled, dress stuffed in a garbage bag, eyes hollow. "Mary," she whispered, "what happened?" And I told her everything. The look on her face went from heartbreak to fury in seconds. My mother was gentle by nature, but that day she looked like she could burn the world down for me. She held my hand and said, "Then we tell them. We tell everyone." I hesitated. I didn't want drama. I didn't want to be pitied. But I also knew that if I stayed silent, they would rewrite the story. They would turn me into the crazy ex-wife, the one who overreacted. So I said yes. We arranged a small gathering at my parents' house a week later. Close family, mutual friends, people who'd been at the wedding. I didn't wear black or try to look broken. I wore white again. The same shade I'd worn on my wedding day, but this time not as a symbol of innocence, as armor. When everyone was seated, I stood in front of them. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied. I want to tell you something. Something that happened the night I was supposed to start my forever. And I told them. I told them how I'd gone looking for my husband, how I'd followed the whispers, how I'd found Chloe and Ethan in his mother's room, how I'd walked away without a word, not because I was weak, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break.
The room was silent when I finished. Some people looked at me with disbelief, others with rage. My aunt started crying. My father stood up and left the room before I could even finish. He needed to cool down before his anger swallowed him whole. Someone asked, "Where are Ethan and Chloe now?" I said, "They were invited. They didn't show up." That silence, that empty pair of chairs, spoke louder than anything I could have said. Guilt has a way of revealing itself through absence. After that day, the calls stopped. The sympathy texts turned into apologies. People who'd known us both began to distance themselves from Ethan and Chloe. I didn't ask them to. I didn't need to. Truth has gravity. It pulls justice toward it slowly but surely. Ethan tried reaching out a few times. The first time he sent a message that said, "Can we talk?" I deleted it. The second time, he showed up at my parents' door, looking thinner, tired, and pathetically sorry. I didn't let him in. He said, "Mary, please, it wasn't supposed to happen that way." And I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, Ethan, it wasn't supposed to happen at all." Chloe never came, not once. But she sent a message through a mutual friend, something along the lines of, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just fell in love." I laughed when I read that. You can't fall in love with someone else's husband. That's not falling, that's digging. In the months that followed, I rebuilt myself from nothing. I sold the dress. I took the money and invested it into something I'd always dreamed of, my own boutique. I worked long hours, slept little, cried often, but slowly I began to heal. The business grew. People began to recognize me for my work, not my pain. And with every success, I felt a little less broken. But healing isn't linear. There were days when I'd wake up and hear his voice in my head, or smell Chloe's perfume in passing and feel my stomach turn. Betrayal doesn't just vanish. It lingers, waiting for you in quiet moments. And each time it did, I reminded myself, they took my trust, but they couldn't take my strength.
One afternoon, about a year later, I saw them again. Not in person, on social media. A photo of them together, smiling, holding hands in front of some beach sunset, pretending the world had forgiven them. The caption read, "New beginnings." It didn't hurt like it used to. Instead, I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. Guilt ages people faster than time, and love born out of betrayal never lasts. Still, that photo awakened something in me. Not hatred, not pain, but purpose. I realized I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to build a life so bright that their shadows couldn't reach me anymore. And so I did. You ever have that moment where you look at your reflection and don't recognize the woman staring back, but in a good way? That was me. Stronger, calmer, unapologetically alive.
People began to ask me, "Mary, how did you move on?" And I'd smile and say, "By remembering who I was before they broke me, and by never letting them define who I became after. Because revenge, I learned, doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it's just peace. The kind that makes your enemies wonder why you're smiling when they expected you to be shattered." But peace wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Because fate had a funny way of introducing me to someone who'd teach me what real love, not lies, not convenience, but love actually looked like. And his name was Ryan. The next morning, I woke up in a bed that didn't feel like mine anymore. The sheets smelled like flowers, but underneath I could still smell the rot of deceit. Ethan was gone. He'd left a note on the dresser. Just a few careless words scribbled on hotel stationery. "Didn't want to wake you. Meet you downstairs. For breakfast. Love you." Love me? He had the audacity to write that after whispering Chloe's name into my skin like it belonged there. I sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at that note. My heart was split between wanting to scream and wanting to stay silent forever. Then I did something strange. I smiled. It wasn't happiness, it was realization. I had spent years being soft, years being understanding, forgiving, the perfect girlfriend, the patient fiancée, the devoted wife, for barely 12 hours. But now, I was done playing the part they wrote for me. I took a deep breath and dressed myself in the same white dress from the night before. It was wrinkled and stained with tears, but it was still mine. I wanted him to see what he'd destroyed. Not a woman begging for answers, but the ghost of the wife he'd already buried. When I walked into the hotel lobby, I saw them, Ethan and Chloe, sitting together at the breakfast table like two actors rehearsing a lie. He looked up at me and smiled, almost relieved. She avoided my eyes, pretending to stir her coffee. I could hear the sound of my pulse more than their voices. I walked over slowly, calm, deliberate. When I reached the table, I placed the note between them and said quietly, "You forgot this." Then I walked out. No screaming, no tears, just silence. The kind that makes guilty people crumble. I didn't go home that day. I went to my sister's apartment across town. She was the only person I trusted enough to see me broken. When she opened the door, she saw everything. The wedding dress, the hollow eyes, the forced composure. She didn't ask questions, she just held me. And for the first time since that night, I let myself cry. Over the next few days, I went through every stage they talk about. Denial, anger, bargaining. But mine didn't feel clean. They blurred into each other like oil on water. Sometimes I'd wake up angry, other times I'd just feel nothing. But beneath it all, something new was growing. It wasn't forgiveness, it was focus. I started collecting details, dates, messages, subtle moments I'd ignored. Every girls' night Chloe had missed, every sudden late meeting Ethan had, it was all there. Pieces of a puzzle I'd been too naive to see. And the more I looked, the more I realized they hadn't just betrayed me on a whim. They'd planned it. Slowly,
carefully. They'd built their love on the ruins of my trust. But here's the thing about ruins. They can be rebuilt, just not the way people expect. So I started rebuilding myself, quietly. I changed my number. I blocked them both. I deleted the photos, the texts, everything that tied me to them. And then I started working on me, on my future, on a plan that would eventually make both of them remember my name every single day. Not as Mary, the betrayed wife, but Mary, the consequence they never saw coming. And as fate would have it, the first brick of that plan arrived disguised as a job offer. A company was expanding, and they wanted me to manage a new branch. The only catch? It was in the same city Ethan and Chloe had just moved into. I didn't believe in coincidences anymore.
I moved to the new city 3 months later. New place, new job, new version of me. I didn't tell anyone except my sister. I cut my hair short, changed my wardrobe, and walked differently, like a woman who no longer sought permission to exist. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw less of the old Mary and more of someone I didn't recognize. Someone who looked calm, but dangerous. The first few weeks, I focused only on work. I buried myself in it, learning everything I could about management, finance, operations. I wanted to be so good that no one could ever question me again. And it worked. I started climbing fast. My new boss, Ryan Carter, sharp suit, quiet confidence, the kind of man who notices everything, saw potential in me immediately. But he never pushed. He just said, "You've got that fire, Mary. Don't waste it on anger. Use it." Those words stayed with me. I didn't tell him my story, but something about his tone made me believe he'd already guessed parts of it. He treated me like someone rebuilding an empire from ashes, not like a victim. Then one morning, as I walked into the office cafe, I froze. There, laughing with one of our team members, was Chloe. The same Chloe who'd stood by my side at the altar, who'd smiled as she handed me my bouquet, now smiling in my workplace as if she hadn't burned my world down. My hands shook, but only for a moment. I didn't let her see me. Not yet. I walked calmly, breathing slow, my heels echoing down the hallway like war drums. Later that day, I found out she'd joined as a marketing consultant for a partner firm. Of course she had. The universe was handing me the script. All I had to do was deliver the lines. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights glowing below me like distant embers. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. I realized revenge wasn't about shouting or breaking things. It was about strategy, about letting the guilty destroy themselves with your silence. Over the next few weeks, I made sure to cross paths with Chloe just enough for her to notice. A smile in the elevator, a polite wave at the lobby, a casual compliment in a meeting. I could see the discomfort growing in her eyes. She looked like someone constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then the shoe did. One evening, our department announced a collaboration project between my branch and her firm, and I was assigned as the lead coordinator, meaning she would be reporting directly to me. The look on her face when our names appeared together on the screen was priceless. She didn't even look at me. She just froze, her mouth slightly open, like she'd seen a ghost. In a way, she had. That night, as everyone congratulated me on the promotion, I smiled, drank my champagne, and whispered to myself, "Welcome to my game, Chloe." I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to threaten. I just needed to wait, because guilt is a slow poison, and I was going to make sure she drank every drop of it. But fate, as always, had other plans. A week later, Ryan called me into his office. He looked hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mary,
We're partnering with Carter Tech for a long-term contract. Their lead representative will be joining our meetings next week. I wanted to give you a heads up. Carter Tech. My heart skipped. Who's their representative? I asked. He sighed. Ethan Carter. I sat there for a moment, letting the name settle like dust on glass. The man who had ruined me. The man who had once promised forever. And now, unknowingly, he was walking straight into my world, the one I'd rebuilt without him.
I smiled faintly. Thank you, Ryan. I'll be ready. When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. Cold, perfect clarity. They had taken everything from me once. Now I was going to take something far more valuable from them, their peace. When I got home that night, I didn't pour a drink or cry or even think about him. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began researching Carter Tech. New contracts, financial statements, employee structures. I wanted to know everything, not because I cared, but because power requires preparation. Ethan Carter, Chief Operations Manager. Married. No kids. Married to Chloe Daniels. The realization didn't sting anymore. It amused me. They had done it. They'd built a life together on top of my ashes. But now, without knowing it, they were about to walk straight into the fire I'd been quietly building. Over the next week, I worked like a strategist, planning a quiet coup. I reviewed every project file. I called in every favor. I made sure the upcoming partnership would be so important that Ryan and the entire board would depend on me to make it succeed. That meant full access, full visibility, and full control over every interaction with Carter Tech. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was building a stage. Every message I drafted, every email I sent, every decision I made was a step toward tightening the invisible web around them. I didn't want them to know I was coming. I wanted them to feel safe, until safety became their downfall. When I finally saw their names appear on the meeting schedule, I smiled. I even rehearsed my greeting, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted it to sound effortlessly civil, the kind of politeness that hides a knife behind the smile. In the days leading up to the meeting, I started shifting perception in small ways. During lunch breaks, I'd casually mention Ethan Carter in conversations with upper management, usually followed by something neutral but thoughtful, like, "I've heard mixed things about his follow-through." Nothing harsh, just enough to plant a seed. And with Chloe, I didn't have to do much. Guilt had already made her clumsy. She made small mistakes in her reports, fumbled during presentations, looked tired. I never corrected her publicly. I just quietly fixed her errors, then copied higher-ups on the updated versions, with a polite note like, "Just ensuring accuracy." Every time, her face would pale a little more. She knew I was in control, but she couldn't accuse me of anything. That's the beauty of strategic revenge. It hides behind professionalism. A few days later, Ryan asked me to brief the team on our Carter Tech collaboration. I stood at the front of the conference room, calm and confident, while a dozen people watched me outline timelines and expectations. And just before the meeting ended, I said, "We'll be working closely with Mr. Ethan Carter and his associate, Mrs. Chloe Carter. I'm sure we'll all find this partnership rewarding." The room buzzed. The words hung heavy, deliberate. I wanted everyone to hear that title, Mrs. Chloe Carter. Because now, the woman who'd once worn a bridesmaid dress at my wedding would be walking into my boardroom as the wife of the man who betrayed me. That night, I barely slept.
Not because of nerves, but because anticipation can be intoxicating. I could already imagine their faces when they saw me sitting there, calm, composed, successful. No tears, no weakness, just quiet authority.
And yet, there was a deeper layer to my plan, one they'd never see coming. I wasn't going to destroy their careers outright. That would be too quick, too loud. Instead, I wanted them to question everything: their loyalty, their trust, their own stability. I wanted them to turn on each other the way they had turned on me. To do that, I'd need to control the narrative. So I started creating small, subtle fractures. I'd forward Chloe's half-finished notes to Ethan for review, pretending to help. I'd schedule overlapping meetings that forced them to contradict each other. Each time, I made it look like an honest mistake. Within 2 weeks, the tension between them was visible. Ethan would raise his voice in meetings, correcting her mid-sentence. She'd apologize, then glance toward me, silently pleading for rescue. But I never interfered. I just took notes and said softly, "Let's move on." And when the whispers started about Carter Tech's internal miscommunication, about Chloe's declining performance, about Ethan's unprofessional tone, I stayed silent. Because the best revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about watching them destroy themselves while you stand beside them, smiling politely. The first phase of my plan was complete. The second phase would require something colder: exposure. Because secrets like theirs always rot in the dark, and I was about to drag every last one of them into the light. I learned early on that people fall apart in public in a lot of little polite ways. A missed meeting, a shaky apology, a comment that doesn't line up with the record. You don't need a scandal with fireworks to ruin someone. You need consistency, documentation, and an audience that suddenly remembers moral standards it had been willing to ignore. That was the plan. Expose them not with a scream, but with a slow, undeniable unspooling of the truth until there was nothing left to deny. I started by tightening the screws where I already had access. As lead coordinator, I owned the project files, the timelines, the invoices, the collaboration docs. Everything Chloe and Ethan touched passed through me, and every time they tried to cover a mistake, the trail led right back to them. I exported versions, annotated changes, and saved copies in ways that looked like ordinary housekeeping: version controls, meeting minutes, polite, for your records, emails. All of it was mundane. All of it was traceable. Auditors love mundanity. But evidence alone is sterile without context, so I began building context. I documented missed deadlines and the domino effects they caused on our side. I made sure every correction I made, the silent fixes that had once been my way of staying professional, was logged and sent to the appropriate channels with a neutral note, updated for accuracy, see attached. I didn't gloat. I didn't slap their faces with accusations. I made the work speak. And then I pressed the buttons that professionals press when something smells wrong: compliance, legal, HR. Not because I wanted them fired, but because organizations have rules, and rules, when applied without favoritism, are merciless. I submitted a formal concern about conflicts of interest and lack of transparency that might compromise the contract. I attached the version histories, the missed delivery timelines, and the email chains that showed Chloe and Ethan's internal miscommunications had blossomed into something that could jeopardize the entire partnership. My forms were clinical, careful, the kind of paperwork that leaves no room for spin. There were close calls. Ethan picked up on the pattern of my corrections and called me into a corridor one afternoon, voice low and venomous. "Are you trying to make us look incompetent?" he demanded, eyes jittering like a man who slept too little. I smiled. Because smiling is armor. I'm trying to make sure the project delivers, I said. If you can't meet that standard, tell me now so I can plan around it. He went red, and I felt the little victory like a pulse under my skin. Chloe tried more subtle tactics. She approached me in the break room with that same fake gentleness she'd used to touch my veil. Mary, we both want this to work. Don't make things weird. I could see the tremor in her hands when she reached for the mug. That tremor told me everything. Guilt looks like someone trying to straighten a crooked picture over and over. I only nodded. Professionalism, I said. That's what keeps teams together. HR started to take notice because the paperwork stacked up. They asked for interviews. They took statements. People who'd been on the periphery, junior staff who'd watched Chloe miss calls and Ethan blow up over small items, were suddenly given a way to speak in a way that mattered. I didn't coach them. I simply made space for truth to be recorded. There's a strange power in formality. It makes whispers into facts. And then there was the PR angle, because reputations live in the air, and the air is shaped by stories. I worked with our communications officer to draft neutral press language that emphasized contractual integrity and a commitment to transparent operations. When the board convened to decide on the partnership's future, I presented in measured, methodical tones. Timelines, risk assessments, the potential for reputational damage. No melodrama, just numbers and outcomes. That was the hardest part for them to fight. Not because they couldn't counter my facts, but because when facts sit next to convenient lies, the convenient lies look fragile. Their first real crack happened in a routine partner check-in meeting. Chloe tried to smooth over a missed milestone with a charming anecdote. Ethan interrupted, sharp, contradicting her with a defensive timeline that didn't match the uploaded files. Someone in finance, a man who had always been too polite to weigh in, chimed in, "We have a memo showing those deliverables were overdue by 8 business days." You could hear the room inhale. Ethan tried to pivot to blame a vendor. The vendor produced timestamps. The vendor's timestamps were honest. Their story was not. Once the board smelled instability, they moved faster. Contracts were put on hold pending review. Codertech's internal PR team scrambled, replying with talk of restructuring and staff evaluations. Chloe posted a few upbeat photos on social media, desperately captioned with platitudes about second chances. The comments were kind at first, friends covering, but the undercurrent changed. Old acquaintances I didn't know she had began asking pointed questions. When someone in the comments politely asked about the nature of her role on the joint project, she deleted the thread. You can erase a comment. You can't erase the impression left behind. The biggest rupture, though, came when a trusted junior analyst, someone Chloe had belittled in a meeting, but who admired my work, emailed HR with an attached folder of internal communications that painted a stark picture. Missed approvals, edited documents, a separate chain of messages between Chloe and a vendor that suggested preferential treatment. The analyst had been terrified about coming forward. I sat with him for coffee afterward and thanked him for his courage. He kept saying, "I just wanted the right thing to happen." That's what made it so clean. People want to be on the right side of a truth they can point to. Ethan tried to salvage control with a live video address from a symptomatically neutral conference room, a script about learning curves and commitment to improvement. He looked like a man reading from a life he no longer believed in. The video was blunt, stilted, and the comments section, usually a friendly place for business chatter, filled with subtle, barbed remarks. Someone posted screenshots of the deliverable timestamps. Someone else linked to a transcript of his contradictory statements during a recorded meeting. The internet has a way of keeping receipts. Behind the scenes, Carter Tech began an internal inquiry that moved with the cold, bureaucratic efficiency of a system protecting itself. Chloe was placed on leave pending investigation. Ethan was reassigned to a satellite office, supposedly to alleviate pressure on the team. In corporate terms, that often means watched and marginalized. In human terms, it meant their life together started to fracture in the small, humiliating ways that make couples look like strangers.
There were nights I sat on my balcony and watched the glow of the city and felt a wash of something like pity. But it was edged with satisfaction, not because I enjoyed their fall, but because their choices had made it inevitable. I had given them options: honesty, contrition, accountability. They had picked secrecy and selfishness, so they received their chosen consequences. Of course, nothing about this went exactly as planned. There were moments my own actions teetered on the line between professional prudence and personal satisfaction. I had to keep reminding myself why I started, not to ruin for ruin's sake, but to ensure what was right had a chance to outlive what was convenient. I defended every email I'd filed, every note I'd taken, every suggestion I'd made at board meetings with the same calm, factual voice. That steadiness became its own kind of retribution. The woman they expected to break was the woman leading the solution. The climax came in a closed-door meeting with the board and Carter Tech's senior leadership. I sat across from Ethan, whose jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Chloe watched from the periphery, eyes rimmed red. The CEO, 3 seats down, said with a corporate finality that was almost surgical, "We cannot proceed with the partnership under current conditions." Legal counsel spoke of breach of fiduciary duty and unresolved conflicts. HR outlined policy failures. The word termination floated somewhere near the ceiling like a death knell. Afterward, the press release used measured language: personnel changes, restructuring. But inside, something had shifted irreversibly. Contracts were paused, clients pulled back, and invitations that once were automatic evaporated. People who once sent Chloe brunch invites stopped answering her messages. Ethan started getting cold calls from former colleagues who wanted to know why he'd been sidelined. They had built a life on my silence and my trust. When my silence became noise, their world, so carefully constructed, began to crumble. I didn't dance on ashes. I didn't gloat. I went home that night, made a cup of tea, and sat with the quiet. It is strange how empty victory can feel when you realize the cost hasn't only been theirs. I had spent nights mapping their mistakes, yes, but I'd also rehearsed conversations in hotel lobbies and counted my steps in corridors where the light leaked wrong. Revenge takes more of you than you expect. It reassigns parts of your heart. So I sat with the cup in my hands and thought about the woman who once stood at that altar, naive, hopeful, certain that love was a promise that rested on others. She had been reshaped, yes, but not entirely broken. And as the world around me recalibrated, contracts rewritten, reputations adjusted, I felt a different thing rising. Not triumph, but a cautious, clean relief. They had their consequences. I had my life back. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have moved slowly, letting the system do the work? Or would you have lit the fuse and watched everything fall in a spectacular blaze? Be honest. Would you have waited this long for payback, or taken something smaller and immediate? After the boardroom verdict, everything went quiet in that strange, hollow way silence follows a storm. The emails about Carter Tech stopped. Meetings that used to include Ethan's name were replaced by new initiatives. His digital presence faded like ink washed in rain. I didn't realize until a week later that Chloe's social media accounts were gone too.
They had disappeared from the professional world with the efficiency of a system cleaning its files. At first, I didn't know what to do with the stillness. For months, my focus had been sharp, defined by the steps of a plan. Now, the plan was complete, and I woke up each morning to a flat, unfamiliar calm. I kept working because that's what I knew. I expanded 2 more branches of the business, mentored junior employees, started speaking at small industry panels. People began using my name in sentences like reliable and visionary. It should have felt like victory, and in small, steady doses, it did. But beneath it, there was something quieter: fatigue. Healing isn't cinematic. It doesn't arrive with swelling music and a sunlit morning. It creeps in during normal hours, when you find yourself laughing at something silly, when you realize you've gone a whole week without remembering the worst night of your life. That's how it started for me. One of those small, ordinary days, Ryan introduced me to a consultant who'd be advising us on expansion. His name was Daniel Hayes. He had an easy confidence that wasn't performative. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was measured, deliberate. Over time, I noticed how conversations with him didn't require armor. He never asked about my past. He just saw me where I stood. We started having coffee after meetings, then lunch, then long walks that stretched into evenings. There was no rush, no declarations, just quiet companionship that grew naturally, like something returning to life after winter. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I wasn't waiting for betrayal. One night, as we walked along the riverfront, Daniel said something simple that stayed with me. You don't owe your peace to anyone else's apology. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, realizing he understood something even I hadn't fully grasped. That peace isn't what you win after revenge. It's what you choose after you stop needing it to prove anything. A few months later, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Closure. Ethan." For a moment, my hand hovered over the mouse. Then I opened it. It was brief. Apologies, explanations. The language of regret written by someone who finally understood that consequences are permanent. He said he was divorced, that he'd lost everything that mattered, that he hoped someday I could forgive him. I read it once, slowly, and then again, faster. Not a single line made me angry. Not a single word could reopen anything. I didn't reply. Instead, I archived it. Some things don't deserve an audience, not because you hate the speaker, but because you've outgrown the conversation. A week later, Daniel and I took a weekend trip to a small coastal town. It was quiet, full of bookstores and sea wind. On the second evening, we sat on a weathered pier, the horizon dissolving into gold. I told him everything, not as a confession, but as a story that no longer had power over me. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just took my hand and said, "You survived beautifully." And for the first time, I believed it. Sometimes I think about the girl I used to be, standing in a white dress, believing love was a sanctuary. She didn't know that sanctuaries can collapse, that people can fail. But she also didn't know how resilient she could be. I keep a small box at home with a few mementos from that time. A ribbon from the bouquet, a photo of me laughing with Chloe, a piece of the wedding invitation. I don't keep them to mourn. I keep them because they remind me that even in ruin, there was the beginning of renewal. Now my life is simple, and that simplicity feels like luxury. I wake up beside someone who respects the silence as much as the laughter. I run a company that I built from the ground up. I know the taste of loss, and because of that, I understand the weight of peace. If you asked me today whether revenge was worth it, I'd tell you this. It wasn't the revenge that healed me. It was reclaiming the narrative. It was learning that my life didn't end in that betrayal. It only changed direction. The revenge was just the bridge I crossed to find myself again. So, to anyone listening who's still standing in the ruins of something they thought would last forever, remember this. You can rebuild. You can thrive. You can love again. Not because they apologized, but because you chose to stop needing them to. Be honest. If you were me, would you have forgiven, or would you have walked away too?